So welcome back. We'll be talking about ISO, shutter speed, aperture, exposure triangle, everything that basically anyone who is starting photography or a photography enthusiast needs to know. For us to go through this, we're going to use this camera. I'm going to be using this Canon EOS R with a 24-70 Sigma art lens, right? So we're starting from the front and going all the way to the back. And for the exposure triangle, you need to note something, probably get a pen or, let's make it imaginary. I'm going to draw a triangle. And in this case, put a dot first for the first thing we're going to be talking about, which is what? The aperture. So number one, what is aperture? This is a very interesting case. So aperture is the opening of the lens. It has to do with the opening of the lens. It's more or less like your eyes. Probably when you wake up in the morning and the first thing you see is like, oh, it's so bright out, somebody just puts on the light. What do? You squint your eyes, right? By squinting your eyes, you control the amount of light that's entering your eyes in this case. So in this case, as regards the camera, the aperture has to do with what? It has to do with controlling the amount of light that enters or goes in through the camera, or that goes into the camera. But in this case, the lens is what controls it. And for you to understand and to know a technical term as regards that, for aperture, it is measured in what? In f-stops. The lower the f-stop number, note what I just said, the lower the f-stop number, the higher the amount of light that enters into the camera. And the higher the f-stop number, the lower the amount of light that enters into the camera. Now, how that correlates with aperture is, now, lower the f-stop number. So let's say, for example, at f1.8. See if at f1.8, your aperture opening is this wide, meaning that the amount of light that will be entering into your camera will be this plenty. Now, say we are now at f11 or f22, your aperture opening is like this. Do you get what I'm saying? The amount of light that will come in through this is not as much as the amount of light that will come in through this. Do you get what I'm saying? I hope you understand. Let me know in the comment section. So I'm going to repeat it again. They are not directly proportional, they are inversely proportional. So at f1.8, the amount of light that will be allowed or that will go into the camera will be this much because the aperture opening is this wide. But for f22 or f11 or f6.5 or f5.4, it will be smaller, right? Because the amount of light that's entering into the camera is not as much as when it is wider. Do you get what I just said? In another video, we'll talk about how f-stop affects blurriness and aperture and, sharpness. But for this video, we'll focus more on maybe a little bit of entry level into the aperture, right? So aperture affects what? The amount of light that enters in the camera. So at f4.5, the amount of light that will be allowed in the camera is not as much as the amount of light that will be allowed in the camera at f1.8. Do you get that? So that's number one. Let's go on to what? Shutter speed. Now, for you to take a picture, you need your sensor, right? Now, what is covering the sensors is called shutter curtains. Now, the duration of time for the light that is coming in through the aperture to be recorded onto your sensor is called what? Shutter speed. Basically, the shutter curtains, the amount of time it will take for them to open and close is what we call shutter speed, or the duration of time, and it is measured in seconds, right? Or in this case, fractions of a second. Now, if you bring out your calculator or if you bring out your phone to bring your laptop to check your calculator, 1/100th of a second is faster than 1 second. 1/250th of a second is faster than 1 second. 1/4000th of a second is way faster than 1/250th of a second. Now, basically, the duration of time for those shutters to open and close is what we are calling shutter speed. At 1 second, the amount of light that will be captured, or in this case, the amount of time it will take for a shutter to open and close is 1 second, and for 1/200th of a second, 1/200th of a second is 0.005 seconds. That is faster than 1 second. So the amount of time it will take for your shutter to open and close at 1 second is way longer, meaning that it will take more light than 1/200th of a second, which is 0.05. That is like 1 to 3, like 5 times 10 power minus 3 milliseconds. Do you get what I just said? Now, connect the line between your aperture and your shutter speed. Note what I have said before. Your aperture controls the amount of light that's entering into the lens, while the shutter is controlling the duration of time that light will be captured by your sensor. Now let's go on to what? Your ISO. Now we've connected the aperture and ISO and shutter speed. Now I'm going to connect it to the ISO. But for now, let's leave it. So your ISO, remember I talked about the sensor. What is the sensor? Your sensor is like this very beautiful electronic device behind your camera that helps you capture images. It has some sensor, it has some pixels and everything, but like that's for another video. So basically, the sensitivity of that sensor to light is what we call ISO. For example, say you want to cook, you want to fry chicken. I've used this scenario so many times. Let's say you want to fry chicken and you put your oil into your frying pan and you put it on fire, whatever fire you're using. If you throw the chicken into, or if you put the chicken into the fried oil immediately, you're not going to get any reaction. But say you put the oil on fire or in the frying pan and put it on fire and leave it for about 10 minutes. Immediately you put the chicken into the boiling oil, you are going to get this sizzling effect. It's going to push everywhere. You're going to be, oh my god! Do you get what I just said? Now the sensitivity of that oil to a chicken being put into it, in this case, is what we call ISO. Now, in this case, what we are now talking about is the sensitivity of the sensor to the light that is being captured by both the aperture and the shutter speed. Now, the higher the ISO number, the more sensitive your sensor is to light, and the lower your ISO number, the less sensitive it is to light. Do you get what I mean? And I think it's measured in like 200s, right? So ISO 100, ISO 200, ISO 400, ISO 600, ISO 800, ISO 1600, 3200, 6400. What else? Let me check my camera. I don't really put all these things in my head. 12,800. But in between all these ISO numbers, there are stops. It depends on the camera you're using. For DSLRs, for the entry level DSLRs, I don't think they have this amount of stops, because for example, this Canon EOS R, they're like 2 stops each. So like say from ISO 800, you have ISO 1000, ISO 1250, then ISO 1600. Now, like I was talking about, the lower the aperture, the lower the ISO number, right, the less sensitivity is to light. The higher it is, the more sensitivity is to light. Now, to explain again, to help you understand something about ISO, so the higher the ISO number, right, like I said, the more sensitivity is to light. And when it is very sensitive, there is something that occurs. We call it noise and heat, basically noise, right? So the quality of an image at ISO 1000 or 12,500 or 12,600 is not going to be as sharp, or is not going to be as good as ISO 100, because at that moment it is so heated up, it is so sensitive that it's very prone, or in this case, it's very sensitive to heat and noise. So the heat and noise will cause this stuff. When you look at the image, you see those dot on the image, and then it loses its quality. But it's not a bad thing. Just ensure that you have a midpoint, or get a good camera that works well with ISO sensitivity, or in this case, noise reduction, right? Because in editing, there's noise reduction. You can reduce the noise and get back the quality of the image, but it won't be as good as when you are shooting like at the base ISO. I hope you understand what I've said. So to connect everything all together, you're going to have your aperture connected to your shutter speed, and both of them connected to your ISO. So now to explain it as a triangle, that's how we have an exposure triangle. Now, a lot of people that play football, or in this case play FIFA, play PES, when you see a player start, you probably see that, probably I've not really played FIFA in a long time. Probably see that the dribbling or the attacking is, the person's attacking is better than the defense, or dribbling is better than this and that. You will just see a very weird diagram. But in this case, for example, we are talking about exposure triangle. Now let's put a scenario, right? For example, you are in a partially lit environment like this. right? What are you going to do, or what are you going to put your settings as at for your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed, right? Depending on what you're trying to shoot, you will need to adjust all three of them to ensure that you have a good image, or in this case video, right? So right now we're on ISO 1000, shutter speed of 1/60th of a second, and aperture opening of f4. So let's say, for example, I'm to put off this light. How am I going to properly lit this environment for the image I'm trying to take? So let's do something. I'm putting off this light, right? What do you think I would need to do? Because my shutter speed is at 1/60th of a second, 1/50th of a second, and for video in this case, you have to shoot at ×2 of your frame rate. So I cannot go beyond 1/50th or 1/60th of a second. And my shutter and my aperture opening as f4. That means the widest it can go, or the amount of light it can allow in, is not that plenty. What am I going to do? I'm going to take my ISO in this case, and I'm going to increase it. And in increasing it, you will see that the environment or me becomes brighter. I hope you can see what I'm saying. Now, let's take it back. Let's reduce it entirely. Now, let's say we go outside, right? So, as you can see, right, it is dark. And it's a little bit bright outside. So what are we going to do? We are going to try and increase either the ISO or the aperture. So for now, we are going to start with what? Increasing the aperture. So now it's at f9 now. So we are going to make it brighter, or basically make the aperture opening wider. And as you can see, it's stopping at f4, meaning that it can't go beyond f4, right? This is the widest it can go. Now let's now compensate by what? Increasing the ISO. And increasing the ISO, which at the moment is at ISO 200, we are going to increase it to ISO 500, or say 1000 or 800. As you can see, it is getting brighter and brighter, and you can see my face, a very fine face. So basically, whenever you are in any situation, any scenario, you will need to set your aperture, your ISO, and shutter speed depending on whichever environment you are in. At the moment, the background is brighter than me, but then you can still make out my face. Water just dropped on me, but yeah, you can still make out my face, and you can see that it is bright. So let's say, for example, I'm probably outside. You might not actually need to increase your ISO that much, depending on wherever you are. So let's say it is very sunny, like it's bright. You might probably just need to stay at ISO 100, and let's say you want to take a picture, you can increase your total shutter speed to what? It's probably like 1/200, 1/400, depending on whatever you're doing or whatever you're trying to take a picture. So thank you. We're going to come back inside now. It's cold. Yes. So yeah, I hope you've been able to see these scenarios. Like I said, wherever you are, you need to set your shutter speed, aperture, and ISO based on the environment you are in. Now, in another video, I am going to correlate the aperture and shutter speed as regards to sharpness and what? Depth of field. But for this video, we just wanted to talk about everything exposure. Remember, I talked about it being a triangle. You can stretch the triangle however you want. Isosceles triangle, right angle triangle, equilateral triangle, meaning that you can set it, you can take your ISO to 1000, probably leave your aperture at 1.8 and leave your shutter speed at 200th of a second, depending on whatever you want it to be. I hope you've been able to learn one or two things. Until next time, bye.